I often talk about different iterations of what I call Saturn symbolism or different components to it. And one component that has come up in other videos, on my past channels, on my other existences on the internet under different accounts and everything, one way that you can conceptualize one component of it is as escapism. And this is just another example of the escapism component to this thing. We are mostly focusing on a biblical example in this video, primarily Cain and what happened to him after he killed Abel. I'll say up front, I'm not a biblical scholar or anything like that. I hope some of this makes sense and is coherent. This is just a famous statue of, or illustration of Cain, or depiction of Cain, I guess is a more accurate word. Obviously, that conveys an emotion of shame and regret. He's covering his face, he's hiding his face, he doesn't want to be seen. He wants to forget, which is kind of the theme, which is a key component to what escapism is, right? You want to forget or run away or hide. And obviously this ties up into the illusory, illusion, deception, matrix-like component of Saturn symbolism as well. And Cain kills Abel. God says, nobody touch him. He's going to live with this forever. And he's going to be basically emotionally torn and tortured with guilt and regret forever. There's a lot I could say about Cain and Abel, the story, and people making inadequate sacrifices and the type of sacrifices that they make, and resentment towards existence and reality and life itself and towards God. But I'm not really trying to necessarily focus on that. I'm focusing on what happened to Cain after he killed Abel. Okay. I actually made a Cain and Abel video like 10 years ago. It's one of the first videos I ever made. Of all people, honestly, Jordan Peterson does a good job of like psychologically breaking that story down. Whatever, I don't know how you feel about that. I don't know how you guys feel about Jordan Peterson, but he does do a good job on some of this stuff. The land of Nod is a place mentioned in the book of Genesis of the Hebrew Bible, located on the east of Eden, where Cain was exiled by God after Cain had murdered his brother Abel. According to Genesis, Cain kills Abel and he goes to the land of Nod. The land of Nod can refer to the mythical land of sleep, a pun on land of Nod. Genesis 4:16, to go off to the land of Nod plays with the phrase to nod off, meaning to go to sleep. And I'm sure there's, I don't know the word for it, a historical element to this, and it's not meant to be purely symbolic. Like, it's kind of like how Babylon is symbolic but also an actual place, right? So Nod could literally be an actual place historically, and this is what I mean by I'm not a good scholarly person. I don't know, but I'm just taking it symbolically. So he kills someone, he does something that racks him with so much guilt that he runs away into a dream or psychological repression, or who knows how far it goes, right? He runs into the idea of escapism, like not confronting the reality of who he is and what he did. And obviously, there's a lot of motivations for why someone would participate in escapism, and this is where I try to bring it down to our level. One of them is obviously fear, right? And a really juvenile example would be, it's like, okay, I've been cheating on my diet a lot lately. I don't really want to see what the damage is. So I'm going to not step on the scale. I'm going to hide from the consequences of my actions, or I'm going to hide from the results of what I've been doing. I don't want to look at my bank account because I know I'm in financial straits and I've been perhaps spending irresponsibly. So there's a fear component to it, which is a big element. There's also perhaps just like a laziness thing, like it's more comfortable and easy to play a video game than it is to go on a run or something like that. There's also a regret thing, right? And that's a big component to how this thing feeds in itself. And I've experienced this personally, and perhaps you guys have in many ways as well. And I'm not trying to trivialize this idea, but I'm trying to, a lot of the times with these occult ideas or archetypes or whatever, they make sense on a bunch of different layers at the same time, simultaneously. So I think it's important to give examples of what I'm saying or what I'm trying to get at least in principle, that relate to our own personal lives, even if it's not the most grand, strongest iteration of what this thing could look like. Like I could say, okay, escapism in its final form, you know, would be all these technocrats get together in a conspiracy and they create a technological dream world like the Matrix that we're all inserted into. Like that would be perhaps like a final form, very dramatic iteration of escapism, but in principle, we participate in it in spirit. We participate in it in a variety of different ways. To finish my point about the regret and the fear and how it feeds into itself, it's kind of like when people feel like they've dug themselves in a hole and they don't know how to get out of it. And that's how despair and like cynicism and nihilism and all that stuff kind of sets in too. It's kind of like when you hide from your problems, they get bigger, which makes you less apt to confront them. So the problem gets bigger again, which makes it you less likely to confront it again. And the problem gets bigger and you get smaller. And you can see how the hole keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper to the point where people feel like this situation is too fucked and there's nothing I can do about it. And obviously that comes with feelings of regret. I'm going to share something personal with you guys, and this is probably going to sound a little not totally sane, but I just want to be honest with you. There's times where I remember something, and I'm sure you all experience this, and it might be a stupid example, like, oh, I said that not cool thing. I didn't look cool in front of that girl or whatever the hell. You know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily have to be a very deep example, but I often will say things to myself. If I'm remembering something I don't want to remember, I'll say like, ah, like I'll make an audible noise, like, ah, to like shout it out of my head. Or I'll literally even say like, I don't want to remember that or forget that or something. Like I'll literally do that. And I don't know if I'm alone in that, if people do something like that. That's also a part of what escapism is. And that's why in many cases, like when you watch a show, like I watch a lot of anime, right? Villains are often antagonistic to memories. They want to like cut off their past and sever their bonds with their friends and stuff like that. Not to get like anime on you. I don't want to get into specifics of anime. I'll save that for when I make a video about the anime. It's hard for me to stay on track because these ideas show up all over the place and they overlap with other Saturn components. You'll often see that, you know, like Kylo Ren. Okay, here's a dumb example. I'll say Star Wars because, and I never even watched the new trilogy, but Star Wars is more pervasive than an anime is, so perhaps you'll have a better chance of knowing what I'm talking about. But I remember there's a line from Kylo Ren that says something like, forget the past, kill it if you have to. And that's a common thing with villains. They want to sever their memory for one reason or another because they feel like it's holding them back, because it's too painful to hold on to, etc., etc. And that's another reason someone might want to participate in escapism, is because of pain, right? Perhaps it's something they did or someone they lost, and the memory of them is actually like a wound, or it's actually painful to remember them. And I guess the mature takeaway from that is it's better to have loved and lost than to like never loved at all or something like that. But there's a part of us that wants to forget things because they're painful, right? And that could look like, again, in a more sophisticated, dramatic iteration of that in the future, there might be procedures where they can go into and make you forget shit in your head, like actually cut out certain memories of your head technologically, scientifically, physiologically, however they would do something like that. And again, you see how I talked about how part of what keeps escapism going is because it's like a closed circuit. It feeds into itself. You run away, problem gets worse, makes you want to run away more, problem gets worse, makes you want to run away more, problem gets worse. And that's another way to conceptualize Saturn as the world, right? If you feel like the world's too fucked, or the problem's too big and we can't change anything, that obviously keeps the situation going. I talked about this example in the past. Russell Brand, of all people, there was a video he did forever ago where he was talking to this woman who was a heroin addict, and he was saying, he's like, I can see a future for you where it's not like this anymore. Like, where you're dressing nice and you're showing up and yada yada, like a future for you that isn't the current situation you're in. And I've talked about this in so many other examples, and like the pentagram and stuff. And this is kind of what I mean by it's a closed circuit, or it's the world. It lacks the transcendent. It lacks imagination. It lacks hope. It lacks belief in the possibility that things can be different than the way that they are. So people, obviously escapism is a sort of resignation or giving up. It's just a more, at least in modern age, more cozy version of that. You know, I'll drink alcohol or smoke weed or play video games or scroll my phone or whatever. How often do people talk about disassociating now, right? Oh, I was disassociating for like 5 hours. Well, disassociating means you weren't here. You were somewhere else. You were essentially participating in escapism. Anyways, let's continue with the examples. And Cain went from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. Genesis 4:17 relates that after arriving in the land of Nod, Cain's wife bore him a son, Enoch, in whose name he built the first city. All right, this is where it's going to get weird, okay? And this is why you see so much Saturn shit in technology companies. And I'll talk about that in other videos. I'm trying to stay on track here, guys, but this is really hard for me to say to you coherently, so please bear with me. Bill Cooper, of all people, I remember listening to The Hour of the Time years ago. I don't even remember what video it was or what he said before or whatever he said after, but he said something one time, and I just remember like this one sentence, and he said, that would mean civilization itself is satanic. How's that for a bedtime story or something like that? He said something along those lines. Civilization is part and parcel, like symbolically aligned with Saturn. Civilization itself is almost a dream world. It's a place where, you know, laws are made up by men and we exist by different rules. It's a place that by its very nature is almost detached from truth, which again, Cain went from the presence of our Lord, of the Lord, and dwelt in the land of Nod. When you're participating in escapism, part of what you're doing is running away from reality or truth, which that's one way you could think about running away from God or the Lord. And I'm not saying that's all God merely is, but that's how it functions psychologically, at least a little bit. There could literally be an actual God. I kind of believe that there is, and that's fine if you don't, whatever. I feel like the Bible here is making a spiritual claim or a symbolic step forward, or it's making it like a claim about escapism or dream world or whatever, and city building and nation building. As it's city building and nation building is like an evolutionary step of this escapist Saturnian mindset, right? And I know that sounds kind of unhinged, and it's not like I want to go live in the woods. I enjoy living in society, and it goes to show it's almost, I'm not saying technology itself is necessarily like this, but I mean, let's get into it, man. I'll just show you this next thing, and it's like, I need to put on my glasses. The murderer Cain trying to cover up his crime. You will note in the story that Cain was not punished by God by killing him. In fact, God said he would be protected, which means that he is important in the interpretation of the story on the spiritual level. Cain was also the father of farmers and the people who are artists. I don't know about the artist thing, but farmers, again, I'm not trying to shill my other videos. There's a reason I highlighted that. And I didn't just put this stuff together yesterday. I've had all this stuff for years. So me in the past thought that was important, and it is. Go watch my video that I made forever ago. I actually re-uploaded on this channel. I think it's like Saturn agriculture or whatever, the overlap between Saturn symbolism and what it has to do with agriculture. And I really try to unpack that briefly. Obviously, what enabled nomadic people to stay in one place and start building civilization? Well, that would be the advent of agriculture. So you have corn and wheat and grain. Remember, like that expression, you're going against the grain. Well, why is that an expression? It's like you're going against the world, right? The way things are. And you see how this is starting to overlap, not just with escapism, but with, I don't know how else to put it, but like Satan being the god of this world, right? We're in a system that is in principle tied up with the spirit of Cain, so to speak. And Cain is in principle, he's not literally Satan, but he's more aligned. It's kind of like an archetype, right? He's like the villain archetype. And perhaps he has certain attributes about him that are more prominent than like other villains. But it's like if you watched 1,000 movies and wrote down every similarity that the villains had. It's kind of like Cain is kind of like Nimrod, and Cain is kind of like Satan. And I'm not saying he literally is, but he's part of a similar archetype, a similar spirit. It's the same way the Bible will say, oh, this city's become Babylon, or like Babylon, or it'll literally call a city Babylon. It's like, well, it's not because the city changed its name to Babylon. It means it's principally, spiritually interchangeable with Babylon. I'm sure you guys understand that. The Bible often, and not even just the Bible, but many religious teachings, or you don't even have to go be religious or spiritual necessarily, but obviously we all feel like the world wants us to be a certain way. It wants to unify, it wants to consolidate, it wants to compress, it's kind of antagonistic towards individuality. It's not even entirely conspiratorial, it's almost like just by its very nature, but it is conspiratorial, meaning like it's deliberately cultivated by certain people in power or whatever. Some of the tragedies that are intrinsic in life cultivate this kind of fatalistic attitude, right? If you love someone, they're eventually gonna die. So like there's all these things that are there's random tragedies that happen that sort of encourage this cynicism that, oh, this is just the way the world is, and I just have to play the game the way it is before me. And it's obviously like God and Jesus, they're redeemers, they're transcendent, they exist outside of the world. I am from above, you are from below. That's why I likened it to imagination and hope. It's the belief that things can be different than the way that they are. It's the belief that you could change or be redeemed or be born again or whatever. You know, it's the difference in attitude right now politically, where some people feel like America is just a sinking ship, so let's just loot it while it goes down, or we can actually turn this sucker around and, you know, save the country or something like that. He had a famous grandchild called Tubal Cain. The word Cain means smith. Tubal was a district in Asia Minor where many of these artificers or metal workers lived and did their creative work. The next step, you have like escapism, dream world kind of thing. And this is where it starts to overlap with technology. But you have Cain meaning smith, which we'll get into that. And now you see it went from the civilization builder to the farming to the metalworking. With the metalworking, some of the first iterations of that were weaponry, like iron swords or bronze swords or whatever. That's even pointed out in the Bible itself. And I'm sure that's backed up somewhat historically. I don't know. Again, I'm not a historian. I'm not a really well-read person. It's just, again, it's saying spiritually, there's some kind of connection, or psychologically or whatever, there's some kind of connection between what Cain is and our proclivity for like civilization building and warfare. That's all I'm trying to illustrate here. Metalworkers lived and did their creative work. Tubal Cain simply means smith from Tubal. And there's another like stupid little quick facts about Tubal Cain. The logo for Tubal Cain, some people used to say it looked like the logo for Facebook. I don't know if that's true or not. Or I mean, it just looked like an F. It's like a cane with like two balls on the side, and I guess that kind of looks like a lowercase f. Also, there's this old video of Joe Rogan, of all people, and I don't even know what show it was from. But if you look up Joe Rogan Tubal Cain, it'll probably come up. And this, I'm sure this isn't true. There is some truth in it, but I don't recommend that you do this. So I don't know how true it is in practicality. But there's a video of Joe Rogan, and he was on some show, and he's making a joke about how if you go into court and say, you know, Tubal Cain, you're basically suggesting to the judge, who's a Mason or whatever. Which I do believe the reason judges wear black robes and all that stuff is because Saturn, again, is tied up with law, civilization, all that kind of stuff. And just watch my other videos, and I feel like I make that case more and more. I can't cover every base in every video. Judges are sort of a priest class for a Saturnian system. Like, that is conceptually coherent to me. But Joe Rogan's joke was like, oh, if you say Tubal Cain, they'll recognize you as like a Masonic brother and let you off the hook for your crime. Obviously, that's like a joke. That's probably not going to work if you go to court. But it's just interesting it was even making that connection to Tubal Cain and law and judges and stuff, because that's somewhat accurate. Tubal Cain simply means a smith from Tubal. East of Eden would be Persia, and that is a long way from Asia Minor. So here again, we have good reason to question the historicity of the story. in a literal search for meaning, we would have to ask the question why God would reject Cain's offering. Is this just a farmer and the cattleman story of conflict? Go watch my agriculture video. There's illustrations. Cain, again, he's the farmer. He offers up grain and crops. Abel offers up like a goat or like a living sacrifice, so to speak, which I'm not going to get into the story of Cain and Abel necessarily. I'm trying to focus on this component to it. So when we seek the spiritual meaning of the story, we find that it makes a great deal of sense. Abel means breath or vapor. He represents the spirit in us, the inspiration and intuitive guidance that comes to us when our consciousness is impregnated with spiritual ideas or divine guidance. The offering of the animal is the willingness to give life or expression to these spiritual ideas. The ancients believed that the life of man was in the blood. Blood was used to purify individuals and things. Blood was sprinkled on individuals, wiped upon articles, and used in various ways in sacrificial offerings. The ancients believed that gods would come to visit them on planet Earth. The Hebrews believed that their god was in the temple in Jerusalem. It was believed that the food the gods loved the best was the blood and suit of animals, and therefore the blood was drained from the animal. Which all sounds kind of barbaric, and it kind of is. The idea of sacrifice, obviously conceptually very deep. It's something that we all kind of understand. You give something to gain something, and there's different qualities of sacrifice. To be, again, very stupid about it and like trivial about it, I'm trying to get fit, exercise, right? Well, a low quality sacrifice is like, I'm going to give myself 10 minutes to work out, but I'm not going to change my diet or anything. A high quality sacrifice would be like, I'm going to go to the gym 4 times a week and I'm going to not eat junk food. That's a higher quality sacrifice. It's a higher, there's that old revolutionary flag, an appeal to heaven, right? You're making an appeal to heaven. A covenant just means a contract too. You're making an arrangement. I give you this, you give me that kind of thing. Which sounds very mercantile and like transactional, and I don't necessarily think that's necessarily the right way to think about things. But life and spirituality does have this sacrificial component to it. And that's all I'm going to say about that. This is just another thing from the Bible that is making that connection between Cain and smiths. And I don't actually have the second verse pulled up, but I do. Behold, I have created the smith that bloweth the coals in the fire, and that bringeth forth an instrument for his work. And I have created the waster to destroy. Which is kind of a hard thing to think about, because God's saying the Bible is making a connection between the art of blacksmithing and destruction and warfare and like coercion and violence and shit, right? I think that's probably accurate. I know blacksmithing probably has done so much other stuff, like you can forge things that are not tools of death or instruments of coercion or violence, you know what I mean? But it does have that symbolic literary association with it, it seems. And we've all often heard of this following verse: no weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is of me, saith the Lord. Again, I'm not a biblical expert, but we've all heard that no weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper. And the thing that before I cut myself off, the thing that feels like a tough pill to swallow is the first part. It's like, I have created these things, that the waster to destroy and yada yada. It's like these spiritually wicked, these principally wicked things, and the people that act on them are existing right now with God's permission. So it's like this guy who's building bombs and weapons that are going to be used to kill, and all this stuff is happening under God's permission to some extent. Obviously, that's true on some level, because it doesn't necessarily mean God would approve of it. I guess it depends on what you mean by God. If we're going to go literally, like a literal God, then it kind of bleeds into that whole old argument, like, well, if God exists, then why is there like intrinsic suffering on the earth? Which is a good question, and I don't really want to delve too deep into that in this video. I've talked about it in other videos. According to more, so we're not talking about the Matrix, right? When I think about Smith, okay, I go to who's the main enforcer of the Matrix, which is what? A huge instrument of escapism. maybe it's not that way to the aliens that created it or whatever. It's an instrument of our enslavement, and for them to like siphon energy off of us or whatever the hell the purpose of the Matrix was to them. But to some people, you know, like you have Cypher, right? He knew what the Matrix was. He's a treacherous person. He eats a steak. He'd rather eat a fake steak in an illusion than, you know, that runny slop crap they were feeding Neo and the good guys, right? So some people prefer the illusion. But Smith is the main agent. He's the main enforcer of what the Matrix is. And right here, see, I was going to even say, oh, the license plate, but they have it, it's written down right here. The name Smith is explicitly attributed as Isaiah 54:16 on the license plate of Smith's car to a passage in the Old Testament, Isaiah 54:16, which is what we just read. So even the movie is making that connection. I don't want to get too deep into the Matrix movie, but a couple things about Smith, even in the later Matrix movies, he goes around and he replicates, right? He can create more than one of himself, and there's a lot of ways to interpret that. And this is why I place importance on who you are and what your character is and what your principles are and where your heart is and where your mind is. Because we can all be conscious or unconscious agents or proponents of a system or a set of values without even consciously, we can be advocating those things without even doing it intentionally. So like if I betray someone's trust, if I do something like betray someone's trust, I'm like spiritually advocating for something evil, even if I don't recognize it like that, even if I don't see the true depth of my sin or my wrongdoings, it's still like principally spiritually tied up to that. And then there's some people who are obviously like willing participants of the system, like they know what they're doing, and that's the more conspiratorial side. But I'd say the average person walking around that holds this system together or even advocates it directly or indirectly doesn't necessarily know what they're doing. And part of that, it's like Jesus said, you know, forgive them, Father, they don't know what they do. And I don't think we do know what we do when we act a certain way. And it's not even when we just act, it's like when we even feel something or think something, it's like it goes to that kind of level of transparency and accountability, which is obviously not totally attainable to be perfect with. I think you should never resign yourself to stop trying or something. I know that was a bit of a tangent. So Smith, right, he can replicate himself, and one of the ways he does that is he blackens the heart of people, right? So he'll reach his hand into their chest, blacken the heart. There's that scene where he has Morpheus tied up and he goes on this rant for his disdain about humanity. He's like, I hate this place. It fucking smells and you're all like disgusting and stuff. Like he actually just hates people. And it's funny because I've said this a million times. It's like the Bible says, a good tree can't produce bad fruit, or a bad tree can't produce good fruit, right? So if something is spiritually, principally, psychologically grounded or rooted in resentment or hatred or disdain, it's not going to produce something good. So when a tyrant, I've said this a million times, so forgive me if you've heard me say this before, but a tyrant feels like to justify his coercion of people. So I have to hold a gun to your head because you're irredeemable and you won't make the right choices and you're not a good person. So I have to force peace or trick you into peace or deceive you or use illusions or whatever, or lies or whatever. They have a presupposition about you and humanity that you're essentially either not fully human, or more precisely that you're irredeemable. Like you'll never change, you'll never be better, so this is how things have to be. And you could see how underneath that is disdain and like hatred. So it puts a lot of doubt on the whole classic government line of, we're doing this for your own good, it's to protect you. And maybe they mean that. They probably don't. They're probably just lying, because a lot of these people have no problem with just straight up lying. They have no honor. They have no integrity. A lie about even some of the most sacred shit means nothing to them. They'll put their hand on a Bible and just lie to your face. It's because all this stuff is of no consequence to them. If this technology that we're building right now in 2026, to bring it back to real life, if these governments are using these kinds of symbols and they're flying certain flags, so to speak, and if spiritually, principally, we can trace back what this kind of stuff is tied up with, and we can infer what they think about people based on how they act, you can easily deduce that what they're doing is not for our own good, and it's not for our own sake, and it's not to protect us. Like other agents, Smith's role is to police and maintain the Matrix by eliminating potential threats to the stability of the system, such as red pills, defective programs. Smith is personified as stern, serious, and nearly invincible. Smith is notably stronger and faster than the other agents. The name Smith, we already covered that, comes from that Bible verse. It's on his license plate. The dialectical opposition between Smith and Neo is a strong indication of what their respective characters represent. Smith is pitiless and single-minded. That consolidation, that unity, that hive mind that I've talked about a million times, and the fact that he can create he turns you into him. You know what I mean? Guys, there's so much shit that I wish I could tell you, man. In this case, Smith is literally turning people into him. But it doesn't have to be that precise. If you ever watch Dragon Ball Z on Namek, this is one of the best scenes ever in Dragon Ball Z. Vegeta is gonna die. He gets shot by Frieza, and Goku's gonna bury him. And one of the things, Vegeta starts crying and like begging Goku, like, you have to win, you have to beat this guy. He killed our whole planet. He's a menace, whatever. And as Vegeta dies, and I'm sorry if you're not familiar with Dragon Ball Z, but I have to get this out there because it's really important. Goku picks up Vegeta and he starts burying him, and he's like, you weren't crying over your own death or because our planet was destroyed. You were crying because he turned you into what he wanted you to be. You never had a chance to be anything else. And that's exactly what the fuck these people do. It's what this system does. They turn you into what they want you to be. And that's kind of like the tragedy of it all. And that's a way it's a single-minded, and that's a way it's single-minded and unifying. The strongest, most evolved iteration of that might be like literal consolidation of all life forms into a single entity. We might get, like a singularity. We're all connected through the hive mind brain chip bullshit. Like that might be on the horizon, but you don't principally have to go that far. We're already kind of there. You're already kind of there when you walk according to the course of the world. You're already kind of there. You're already kind of an advocate. You're already kind of acting like a Smith. I know I'm going off like on a tangent, guys, and I probably sound crazy, but I hope some of that was coherent. Neo is a strong indication. Smith and Neo is a strong indication of what their respective characters represent. Smith is pitiless. Again, that too, the whole condemnation, I won't hear your repentance kind of shit. And single-minded, focused on finality, conformity, purpose, and inevitability. All those things super tied up with Saturn and everything. Like, things are just I can't do anything about this. Things are never gonna change. Might as well just go the way that I'm supposed to go, or whatever. Anything that is adversarial or the antithesis of anything redemptive or transformative. As such, Smith represents determinism, fatalism. By contrast, Neo, with his unpredictable, emotional human nature, represents unbounded free will and the power of choice. Neo's solitary role as the One is contrasted by Smith, who, by replicating himself, becomes the many. Interesting. Anyways, guys, I don't know what more I could say without rehashing some of the same points. I hope some of this made sense to you guys. I try to be as coherent as possible. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. Thank you for hearing me out. I really appreciate it.